Broadcasting to you from somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Once again, it's me, Honey Ann. Hope everybody's doing well today. I'm dealing with internet connectivity issues once again, but I've got faith in the Lord above that all will be well. you know, um, I was looking through the Song of Songs and what it teaches us about relationships. I believe the Lord wants me to focus on relationships, so I'm going to try to speak about this and get through the Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon, to give us some insight on relationships. And insight, you know, so let's break it into like three sections, is what I'm going to try to do. In the first section, Genesis through Nehemiah, and that's the historical section. And the second, Isaiah through Malachi, and that's the prophetic section. And then between historical and prophetic section, that we have the poetic dealing with, the big issues of life. And then God and his worship, Psalms. Relationships among people and how to handle money, Proverbs. I mean, how does God allow evil and still be sovereign? And that's in Job. And then the mysteries of life and how the body matures, Ecclesiastes. And then the Song of Songs, Solomon, how he deals with relationships and dealing with all the facets that go along with it. So we have common sense, in a relationship where there's such strong emotions and passions, which are normal, mixed into a marriage relationship. I mean, do you think God just throws us in and says, figure it out? In 2 Peter 1:3, his divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. God gives us the book of songs, the Song of Songs, and most people haven't even read the book. And if they have read it, they've had a difficult time understanding it. So, a lot of material I'll use is from Tommy Nelson, A Study of Love, Sex, Marriage, and Romance. Okay. And this book is 8 chapters long, taking a couple of and giving you 7 snapshots of their attracting courtship and marriage. And for 2 chapters, you watch this couple fight. I mean, have you ever fought? Well, you'll see this couple fight. And this book, according to Nelson, is meant to be taught to singles so they'll know what to expect. I mean, do you realize people spend more time learning how to drive a car? Now, this book takes marriage and sees it as something divine. Show you your desires and your passions as something normal and view it in the divine. I mean, have you ever been out to eat and you see a couple embracing one another and cuddling, and you think, oh, newlyweds, and they just got married? But as the years go by, something seems to change. Well, friends, it shouldn't seem to be that way. So this afternoon, we're going to look at 3,000-year-old documents that will help us tremendously. I mean, you might think, how could a person write a book on courtship and marriage? I mean, who had ever, thought of that in that manner, and this man had over 700 wives. I mean, who should know better than Solomon, the wisest man? So how can you have a book on worship, the Psalms, with a guy that committed murder and adultery, King David? And how can you have a guy write the church epistles that was part in killing the first Christian, who also said that law produced within him a coveting of every kind? This was the Apostle Paul. So the Song of Songs 1 through 7, 1 through 7. Joseph Pillow, he writes on the background, King Solomon lives in the 10th century BC, and he's Israel's richest man, and he owns vineyards all over the nation. One of them close to Baal Hamon in the northernmost part of Galilee, near the foothills of the Lebanon mountains. While visiting this vineyard, Solomon meets a country girl, Shulamith, and she captures his heart. And for some time, he pursues her and makes periodic visits to see her at her country home. And finally, he asks her to marry him. Now, Shulamith, she gives serious consideration to whether she really loves him and can be happy in the palace of a king, and finally accepts. Excuse me. Now, Solomon, he sends a wedding procession to escort his new bride to be to the palace in Jerusalem. And the book opens as she's getting ready for the wedding banquet and the wedding night. Now, how do you attract? In other cultures, you get married based on character and virtue, and it grows into romance. In America, it starts with romance and it devolves into chaos. Excuse me. Now, what is attraction? In the book of Genesis, Abraham, he sends a servant out to look for a wife for his son, Isaac. And the servant goes and doesn't know who the woman is, but he knows what kind of woman she ought to be. Now, it's not so much that you have to find the right person for your life, but you've got to be solid on the right kind of person that you will not settle for. Now, the servant of Abraham was looking for this. She had to be a believer. She had to be willing to leave everything to believe the word of God and follow him to go back to the land of promise. She had to be a camel watcher. In other words, she had to be a servant. Now, he waited, and God brought that type of woman. She just happened to be beautiful in form and face. Extra bonus. So, what attracts this woman to this man, and vice versa in today's standards? Pleasing is the fragrance of your perfumes. Men in those days didn't have the opportunity to take many showers or baths, so they would cover themselves with perfume. Excuse me. So, when the woman is saying pleasing is the fragrance of your perfume, she was saying you're a nice looking man. But what took precedence over looks, your name is like perfume poured out. A man's name is a man's character, and it's his virtue, his integrity. So the word character comes from the word kroso, a metal tool used to etch something, meaning character is something in your life that will not fade away because it's been etched in you. So your name is more important than your looks. In other words, someone's character, his love, his holiness, his honesty, his morality, his flexibility and ability to listen is far more important than his looks. You can marry a blue-eyed, blonde-haired, 6'4" hunk for you ladies, whose tan body everyone marvels at and who makes a ton of money. However, if that guy will not listen to you and he's rude or a pouty baby, or when he doesn't, get his way, he stomps out mad or, fights you at every turn, he doesn't compliment you and will not love you. All you've done is grabbed yourself a little bit of hell when you marry him. So, character is very important when marrying someone. In fact, it's far superior to someone's looks. Now, character is highly prized. No wonder the maidens love you, not because of his wealth or power, it's because of his character. Now, if someone is pressing you morally, it's because he's done not, fear this. He doesn't fear the standard of God. And if he doesn't obey God when he's dating you, how do you ever think he'll obey God when you're married? Now, when God confronts him with the standard to love his wife as Christ loved the church, he'll break your heart. Her attitude, let's talk about that. Take me away with you. It's the idea that it's a privilege to be with you. In fact, it's a delight. So in your own marriage, what's your attitude? Is it a privilege and delight to be married, or is it something else? We've been dealing with him. Let's now focus on her. Now look at the girl. Tell us she's dark. Dark like the tents of Kedar. Kedar was Bedouin, the Bedouin tribe, which had black wool. So the woman says she's lovely, but yet she has a physical drawback. Why she was like this? Well, first of all, we need to understand one of the most precious things to a woman back then was her skin, and that's why they covered it. Don't stare at me because I'm dark or sunburned. In other words, she was a woman who did not take care of her skin. And the reason, because, her mother's sons made me take care of the vineyards. In other words, she obeyed the authority over her. Simply put, when looking at courting a girl, understand if she can't submit to her father, then she doesn't respect her mother. So, what makes you think she'll treat you in a godly way when you're married? Again, physical appearance is downplayed. Why should I be like a veiled woman beside the flocks of your friends? Prostitutes would veil themselves and follow after the flocks and would give themselves to the shepherd. So, this is where our term hooker comes from. In the Civil War, the prostitutes who followed the Northern Army of General Hooker were called hookers. So, ladies, it means this: there are certain things that you will not do to get a man. You will not give up your relationship with God in order to have this man. I'm still here. I'm making a note. So, when are you ready, to many? I mean, couple of things that will let you know if you're ready to marry according to, see, when there's a set of standards that you have for a mate, and you won't settle for anything less. It's the kind of person you'll wait for. So when you're ready to marry, my handwriting's sloppy. So when you know the things that you will not do to get this man and you're willing to be single. So basically, attraction is a man's name, meaning character, not his physical appearance. And for a woman, it's respect and one who understands authority. You know, it's interesting that the physical beauty plays such a small role. Think about it. Usually, when you get married, you're at the height of your physical beauty. So if you base your marriage on this, it's no wonder why there's so many divorces. I mean, marry for character rather than passion. So we've looked at this, from the vantage point of humans, but it's interesting to look at this from the vantage point of Christ as the King and we as his bride. So let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. So the idea is we long for more, a deep intimacy with him. And your name is like perfume. So Jesus's character is the highest standard. Take me away, a longing to go into the inner sanctuary with Christ. This is of more value than anything. I am dark, and the idea that we are creatures of sin. Where you graze your flock, a longing to be with him. Okay. So let's continue to look through the Song of Songs just in the way of, review for those who weren't really paying attention whenever the stream first started. So Solomon lives in the 10th century. He's the richest king in Israel's history. He's out looking over the vineyards when he meets a country girl, Shulamith. She captures the king's heart for some time, and the king pursues her and makes periodic visits to her. Solomon asks her to marry him, and Shulamith gives serious consideration, and she accepts. So let's look at we looked at the concept of attraction a little bit ago. So, men, your name, your character is far more important than your appearance. And ladies, what's more important than your appearance is your servanthood, your obedience to authority. So, have a set of standards that won't settle for anything less, the art of a relationship. So, the first thing needed in a relationship, the first is time. A relationship takes time. Isn't it amazing that when you're engaged and newly married, you spend all sorts of time together? But if you're not careful, as time passes, you spend less and less time together. So be careful as the years go by that you make sure to spend enough time with one another to keep your relationship intact. So 20 or 30 years down the road, when the children are grown and the careers are coming to a close, when you find yourself with a lot of time to spend with one another, and it's awkward because you hardly know that person that you're married to. You literally are married singles. And to those who are not married, spending time together must have boundaries. Spend time together in public places. Romans 13:14. Make no provision for the flesh. Your friends don't open the door to passion before it's time, or you'll be able to close it. So the king and Shulamith were out in the open while the king was at his table, and our bed is verdant. The beams of our house are cedars, our rafters are firs. So they're outside having a picnic together out in the open with no strings attached, looking at the grass and the trees. And the thing needed in a relationship is cultivating respect. Friends, we need to understand the greatest sex organ is the mind. Respect and romance are cousins. How to cultivate a friendship, being gentle. I mean, what do you say to a girl in order to win her heart? Look at how Solomon sees her. I liken you, my darling, to a mare harnessed to one of the chariots of Pharaoh. In the Orient, the horse was not a beast of burden. The mare was a white steed that leads the army of Pharaoh, the most precious thing in Egypt. and basically saying you are one in a million beyond value. He calls her my darling. The Hebrew word means to guard and care for. So look at what she says about him. Most precious thing to a woman, according, to her, was her pouch of myrrh. It gave a woman her fragrance, and it was very expensive. So the woman is likening Solomon to the pouch of myrrh. His love brings out her beauty. All she does is think about him all day long. Husbands and wives, do you think about each other throughout the day? So how do we regard one another? I mean, Solomon, he compares her to a mare, and Shulamith compares him to myrrh. Your eyes are like a dove, the idea being tender. He looks at her beauty, her inner beauty, and he's soft and gentle. And she looks at him, oh, how charming. This is the same word David uses for his best friend, Jonathan, soulmate. It gives a poor translation, the NIV. The idea that your mate is your best friend. I mean, today, if you were going to take a survey, would you consider your spouse your best friend? And if you say no, then you're out of God's will. So they're out having a picnic, right? And it seems strange that she's talking, about bed and beams of our houses are cedars or rafters or firs. And when she what she's saying is this: you are so wonderful that I feel like a millionaire. She's as happy as a queen living in a palace. All I need is you. So, ladies, this is how you should feel when you're around your mate. Notice, gentlemen, that you have not put, a mitt on them. Guys have a tendency to conquer because they are competitive. So when they have won, they no longer send flowers or do the special things they did before they were married. And men, if they're not careful, they go out and conquer other adventures. So, men, you have to continually guard and respect your wife and treat her gently. What happens when you have given the time to cultivate a relationship regarding and respecting one another? I mean, ladies, she's speaking. I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. I mean, simply put, she feels that she is the most special woman in the world. And compare this with chapter 1, verse 6. Do not stare at me because I am dark. Interesting how much her attitude has changed about herself. Why? Because Solomon treated her like a queen. I mean, if you don't tell your wife she's special, the devil will find someone who will. Not only did this woman's view of herself go up, but also her view of Solomon went up, like an apple tree among the trees. Other guys don't even matter. It's only you, is the idea of what she's saying. I delight to sit in his shade. She enjoys his protection and feels safe and secure. Fruit is sweet to my taste. She enjoys his presence and, his very life. So his banner over me is love. History tells us a general, on the field would identify their troops by a banner. And the general, he owned these troops and his protection was put over them. So his mark of ownership was love. I mean, do you get the picture? Do you see how love grows? Men treat, your wife like a queen, respect her and honor her, and her self-esteem builds, and the man provides, and protects and promotes his wife. So men, if you want your wife to love you, make a choice to treat her like Christ treated the church, and her self-esteem and her self-image will grow, which will benefit you. In marriage, we have a tendency to play the blame game, her fault, his fault, rather than doing that, recognize that we're compared to Christ and women, we're compared to the church. Men are compared to Christ and women are compared to the church. So husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church, and gave himself up for her. In other words, men, if you're sitting out there wondering how to get your wife to love you or increase her love for you, I mean, here it is. 1 John 4:19, we love because first he loved us. The Apostle John tells us the reason why we love God is because he first loved us. So if you want to have your wives love you, then you must first love them. So rather than playing the blame game, make a choice to love, which will entail death. Christ died for the church. Spiritual headship of the home requires, you know, a leader. A leader leads. So what will grow? Not only will your wife's self-esteem and her self-image, but self-esteem and her view of you will grow. You know, strengthen me with raisins considered by the Jews to be an aphrodisiac. In 2 Samuel, when David finally gets the ark back to Jerusalem, dancing and celebrating, David blesses the people by giving them raisin cakes. Why? Because the kingdom was enthroned with God's glory and righteousness prevailed, and David was fulfilling the Abrahamic covenant, descendants, as numerous as the stars in the sky. So you know, they were to go home and be fruitful and multiply. So, the idea is I admire him, I love him, I feel so good because he treats me this way. Now, with you sustaining me with raisin cakes, I'm lovesick for you. So the thing needed in a relationship is restraint. Friends, when you spend time regarding and respecting a person, the natural phenomenon is to give yourself in romance. So that's why we're made. Daughters of Jerusalem, this is verse 7. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. In other words, do not go down this path until you're married. Do not open the door to passions because you will not be able to shut it. But building a fire in a fireplace, what it's designed for brings warmth, light, and comfort. Sex in the marriage is God's plan. Sex outside the marriage destroys. In a relationship, you feel good and you get married and you treat the young lady with tenderness and devotion because you fear God. But if you take the easy way of sexuality and sensuality, it may appear as love when it in the act, but you can't build a marriage on it. And down the road, it will come to a crashing halt. In marriages like this down the road, he doesn't treat her with gentleness and he does not respect, she doesn't respect him. So they start manipulating each other to get something. And she cuts him off sexually and he cuts her off in tenderness and they get mean and mad. Then they go outside the marriage and her seeking tenderness and him seeking respect. So she goes, into civic duties, starts a new career and she goes back to school. These are okay, but they're used as a substitute for the mate. It's wrong. He plays softball 3 times a week, or he's a workaholic to get all the trinkets, to show he's a man. And one day, if they're not careful, she'll go out to the grocery store and she'll run into a man who's nice. Oh, that felt good. Next time she goes, she makes herself up a little better and she's going down the wrong road, or the man will run across a lady who shows him respect. And if he's not careful, it could lead to an affair, you know. So we have to be real careful on those issues. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop it there, and I'll pick it back up later.